She said, "Don't make me say it twice." But when I heard those words, I knew everything was about to change. I first noticed her in that small, sunlit cafe tucked away from the city's rush. One of those places where time seems to slow down, and the hum of quiet conversations fills the air like a gentle melody. She sat alone near the window, a stack of worn books beside her and a cup of coffee half forgotten. There was something about her, an undeniable calm, a presence that made the room feel different when she was there. She wasn't the kind of woman who demanded attention with loud words or flamboyant gestures. Instead, she held it quietly, like a steady flame that neither flickered nor faded. Her hair, touched by strands of silver, caught the afternoon light just so, making the edges glow like a halo. Her eyes were sharp, clear, and observant, but with a softness beneath them, as if she carried 1,000 untold stories. I found myself drawn to her, curiosity prying at me with each glance. Maybe it was the way her fingers lightly traced the rim of her coffee cup, or how she exhaled slowly, eyes closed for a brief moment, savoring something only she knew. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the silence between us. But words tangled inside me, hesitant and unsure. Then, without warning, she looked up. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. There was no warmth in her gaze, not exactly. More like a quiet warning, wrapped in something almost playful. Her lips curved slightly, and she said, "Don't make me say it twice." Her voice was calm, steady, with a low, almost husky edge that sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't anger or impatience, but something firmer, a boundary set clearly, yet inviting a test. I felt the weight of her words settle in the space between us, both a challenge and a promise. I swallowed hard, not quite sure how to respond. She didn't look away. Instead, her eyes held mine, unblinking steady. It was the kind of gaze that saw beneath the surface, that understood hesitation and quiet longing alike. For a moment, I was caught in the way her presence pulled me closer, even though I knew I should step back. Around us, the cafe buzzed softly, the clink of cups, murmured conversations, the faint scent of roasted coffee beans mingling with warm sunlight. But all I could focus on was the steady rhythm of my own pulse, the subtle warmth that spread from my chest down to my fingertips. Her gaze, that quiet command, and the way the light caught her face made everything else fade away. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't going to make her say it twice. That somehow, this moment, brief and charged, felt like the start of something I wasn't ready to name yet. But instead, I simply nodded, feeling the first fragile threads of connection weaving between us. As she returned her attention to her book, a small, knowing smile played on her lips, like she was already a few steps ahead, waiting to see if I could keep up. And in that gentle, unspoken way, she invited me into a story neither of us could predict. After that first charged meeting in the cafe, I didn't expect to see her again so soon. But life has a way of weaving people's paths together when they're meant to cross. The next time was at the park, where she was seated on a weathered bench, her legs crossed elegantly, reading a worn paperback as autumn leaves danced softly around her. The air was crisp, but carried the faint warmth of the sun lingering on the edges of the afternoon. I hesitated before approaching, my heart quietly pounding with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. When she noticed me, her eyes lifted slowly, and that familiar steady gaze caught mine again. No words were needed, just the subtle tilt of her head, a silent acknowledgement. We fell into easy conversation, as if we had known each other for years rather than minutes. She spoke with calm confidence, her voice soft but purposeful, revealing a mind sharpened by life's experiences. There was a quiet laughter that came occasionally, warm and genuine, lighting up the spaces between her carefully chosen words. At one point, as I reached to point out a particularly bright leaf fluttering to the ground, her hand brushed against my arm. It was fleeting, barely more than a touch, but enough to send a current through me. The skin where our contact met tingled warmly, and I caught myself inhaling a little sharper, savoring the moment. Her fingers lingered just a second longer, as if hesitant, then withdrew with a shy smile. Her presence was intoxicating, not just because of how she looked, but because of the way she moved through the world, graceful, composed, yet quietly alive. The faint scent of her perfume mingled with the crisp outdoor air, something earthy and subtle, like cedarwood with a hint of jasmine. It wrapped around me softly, becoming a silent thread linking us in that moment. Over the next few weeks, our paths continued to cross in unexpected places. The neighborhood library where she lingered by the poetry section, the art gallery with its muted walls and soft light. Each encounter grew less accidental and more welcomed, though neither of us said it aloud. I noticed the way she would glance up when she saw me, a spark of recognition and something more tender in her eyes. Our conversations deepened, touching on books, music, and dreams once whispered but never shared. We discovered shared loves and gentle differences, and with each exchange, the invisible thread between us tightened. There was a quiet comfort in these moments. The gentle brush of her hand as she guided me to a painting, the way our shoulders occasionally brushed as we walked side by side through quiet streets. No grand declarations, no rushed confessions, only the slow unfolding of connection, like a delicate flower opening to the sun. One afternoon, as we sat on a bench watching the light fade and stars begin to blink awake, she turned to me and said softly, "You always listen carefully." There was warmth in her voice, a quiet appreciation that made my chest swell. It wasn't just about the words. It was in the pauses, the shared silences, the way her presence filled the space around me like a slow-burning warmth. And I realized, with a mix of awe and hope, that something rare was blossoming, something worth waiting for. The rain came quietly that afternoon, soft and steady, turning the world outside into a blur of gray and silver. We found shelter in the same little cafe where we first met, the warm scent of brewed coffee wrapping around us like a gentle embrace. Outside, the drops tapped rhythmically against the windows, a soothing soundtrack to the pause that settled between us. She sat across from me, hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the steam curling up from her cup. There was a tension beneath her usual calm, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. The confident woman who spoke with quiet authority was now quietly unraveling, thread by thread. Her voice was low, hesitant at first, as she shared a story from her past, a moment she rarely spoke of, a regret that lingered like a shadow. The words were chosen carefully, weighted with the weight of years and experience, but beneath them, I could feel a quiet ache, a longing to be understood without judgment. As she spoke, I watched how her fingers flexed nervously around the ceramic mug, the faint tremor betraying her composed exterior. The way the light fell across her face softened the sharpness in her eyes, revealing something fragile and real. For the first time, the distance between us shrank, replaced by a silent invitation to step closer, to hold space for her without needing to fix or explain. I reached out instinctively, my hand hovering near hers before settling gently on the back of her hand. The skin was warm beneath my touch, smooth but with the faintest trace of calluses, a subtle reminder of the strength beneath her vulnerability. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers twined slowly with mine, a quiet surrender to the moment. In that simple touch, words became unnecessary. The steady beat of her pulse under my palm, the softness of her skin, and the way her breath hitched ever so slightly spoke volumes. It was as if time slowed to honor the fragile thread connecting us, a fragile bridge over the quiet loneliness she had carried for so long. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the glass, yet inside, the world felt still and sacred. Her gaze lifted to meet mine, shimmering with unshed emotion, a mix of trust, fear, and hope all at once. I saw the guarded walls she'd built around herself begin to crumble, brick by brick, as she allowed herself to be seen. There was a long pause, filled with the soft clinking of cups and the muted murmur of other patrons, but it felt intimate, like a whispered secret shared between two souls. The vulnerability between us was no longer frightening. It was a quiet promise of deeper understanding, of a connection that didn't demand perfection but embraced flaws and fears alike. As the rain began to ease, she squeezed my hand gently, her voice barely more than a breath. "Thank you for listening," she said, and I knew she meant more than just the words she'd spoken. It was a gratitude for presence, for acceptance, for the courage to be vulnerable without fear. That afternoon marked a shift, a moment where distance melted into closeness, and the slow-burning ember of something tender and true glowed quietly between us. That evening felt different from all the ones before. The room was softly lit by the amber glow of a single candle flickering on the worn wooden table between us. Outside, the world was quiet, cloaked in the gentle hush of twilight settling in. We sat close, close enough that the faint warmth of her presence brushed against me like a whispered secret, but not quite touching. We were working side by side, bent over the scattered papers and sketches of a shared project. Something small and unhurried, but meaningful. Her fingers traced the edge of a drawing with a careful deliberation that made my breath catch. Every movement she made was precise, elegant, but there was a subtle softness beneath, a vulnerability that hovered just beneath the surface. I tried to focus on the task, but my gaze kept drifting to her. The way the candlelight danced in her eyes, casting fleeting shadows that made her look almost ethereal. The quiet way her brow furrowed when she concentrated, the delicate curve of her jaw illuminated in the warm light. It was impossible not to notice the way her hand occasionally brushed against mine, those brief touches lingering longer than necessary. Each time our skin met, a spark ignited, subtle, electric, impossible to ignore. It wasn't a grand gesture or a confession, just a simple brush of fingers, a shared space in the quiet room. Yet in that silence, the tension between us thickened, stretching like a taut thread ready to snap. Neither of us spoke about it. Not yet. Instead, we let the silence grow, filled with unspoken words and quiet longing. The kind of silence that says more than any conversation ever could. There was a dance happening, a careful give and take, where the space between us spoke of desires neither dared to name aloud. Her breathing slowed, deliberate, almost in rhythm with mine, and I felt the heat radiating from her body, soft and inviting. I imagined how it would feel to reach out fully. Not just a fleeting touch, but a touch meant to stay, to bridge the gap we both tiptoed around. My heart pounded, loud in the quiet, and my hands grew clammy despite my best efforts to remain composed. She glanced up suddenly, eyes locking with mine, and for a moment the world stilled. That single look held everything: curiosity, hesitation, hope, and something tender and fierce all at once. My fingers twitched, yearning to reach for her, but I held back, afraid to break the fragile balance. Instead, I watched as her lips parted slightly, as if about to speak, then closed again. She looked away, the faintest flush coloring her cheeks. The moment passed, but the tension remained, wrapped around us like an invisible thread. The candle flickered low, shadows stretching and shrinking on the walls, as if breathing with the rhythm of the moment. We sat there, two souls suspended in time, caught between what was and what could be. The pull was undeniable, magnetic, but neither of us was ready to surrender just yet. In that quiet room, filled with half-spoken promises and lingering touches, the slow burn of desire glowed brighter than ever, waiting patiently for the moment when it would finally ignite. The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension that neither of us could fully name. Every glance, every lingering touch, every shared smile carried a weight far greater than the moment itself. I found myself caught in a delicate balance, drawn closer by an invisible force, yet held back by the walls of hesitation I couldn't seem to tear down. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to confess the feelings that had settled deep in my chest like a slow-burning ember, warming and consuming all at once. But the words stuck in my throat, tangled with doubt and fear. What if I ruined the fragile connection we had built? What if my feelings were unreturned? The risk felt enormous, and yet the silence between us was growing heavier each day. She seemed to sense it, though she never pressed. Instead, she watched me with a quiet, knowing smile, one that held 1,000 unspoken questions and perhaps answers I longed to hear. There was a softness in her gaze that made my heart ache, as if she too carried a secret weight, a hope waiting to be set free. One evening, we sat together on the small balcony overlooking the city skyline, the air cool and crisp beneath the fading light. The city lights twinkled like distant stars, and somewhere below, the faint hum of life continued, unaware of the delicate moment unfolding above. She leaned closer, the scent of her perfume mingling with the evening breeze, subtle and comforting. My breath caught as her hand brushed against mine, fingers grazing gently before resting lightly over my skin. The warmth of her touch was electric and grounding all at once, a silent reassurance that said more than words ever could. I met her eyes, searching for the courage to speak. My heart thundered loudly in the quiet, a drumbeat of longing and fear. For a moment, I thought I might falter, lose the chance altogether. But then she smiled, soft, encouraging, and patient. Without thinking, I reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. The movement was tender, slow, deliberate, as if I was trying to memorize the curve of her cheek, the warmth of her skin beneath my fingertips. She didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, leaning into the touch as if savoring a long-awaited promise. It was then, in that fragile silence, that I understood I didn't need to say the words just yet. Sometimes, the truth lived in the quiet spaces between us, in the way our hands fit together, in the lingering looks that held secrets, in the gentle hesitations that spoke of hope. She leaned her head lightly against my shoulder, and for the first time, the distance between us felt less like a barrier and more like a bridge, something we could cross together, slowly, carefully, with respect and patience. The night deepened around us, stars shimmering softly overhead. The city buzzed quietly below, but up here, in the stillness, there was only us, two souls learning to trust in the possibility of what might be. And though the words had yet to come, the promise was there, unspoken, but powerful, a silent confession that neither of us could deny. The moment came unexpectedly, like a gentle tide pulling us closer until there was no choice but to surrender. We were seated in her cozy living room, the soft glow of a lamp casting golden hues on the worn bookshelves and the scattered cushions around us. The world outside was distant and quiet, a hush settling over the night like a protective cloak. She looked at me with those steady, knowing eyes, the same ones that had first caught me by surprise months ago in that cafe. But now, they held something new, an invitation, wrapped in tenderness and quiet courage. Her voice was soft, low, but carried the unmistakable weight of promise as she repeated the phrase I'd come to recognize. Don't make me say it twice. This time, the words weren't a warning, but an offering, a delicate challenge, a beckoning to step across the invisible line we'd both been circling for so long. I felt my breath catch as she moved closer, the space between us shrinking until the warmth of her presence enveloped me like a whispered secret. Her hand lifted slowly, fingers trembling just slightly before resting gently on my cheek. The touch was feather-light, but sent a wave of warmth flooding through me, soft and steady, grounding and electrifying all at once. Her skin was smooth beneath my palm, the faintest pulse beating in time with my own. I could feel the subtle rise and fall of her breath, the tender catch in her throat as our eyes locked in a silent conversation deeper than words. In that quiet exchange, years of hesitation and unspoken desire melted away. My own hand rose, hesitating before cradling the side of her face, thumb brushing along her cheekbone with reverence and awe. The moment stretched, fragile and infinite, suspended between the past we'd left behind and the future waiting to unfold. She leaned in just slightly, close enough that I could see the delicate curve of her lips, soft and inviting. The warmth of her breath mingled with mine, a gentle rhythm that made my heart race and steady all at once. Our faces hovered inches apart, the promise of something tender and profound hanging in the air. But she didn't rush. There was no sudden rush or urgency, only the slow, deliberate unfolding of trust. The space between us was filled with a quiet reverence, as if we were both savoring the moment. The first step toward a connection that was as much about respect as it was about desire. Her fingers traced a light path down my jaw to the hollow of my neck, sending shivers along my skin. The soft warmth of her hand was an anchor, steadying me even as my mind raced with anticipation. The subtle scent of her perfume, a delicate blend of jasmine and cedarwood, wrapped around me like a promise. When our lips finally met, it was a gentle brush, tender and searching, the kind of touch that speaks of new beginnings and quiet hope. No words were needed. The kiss was a vow in itself, a whispered acknowledgement that we were ready to step forward together, carefully and honestly. As we pulled apart, her eyes shone with a mixture of relief and joy, and I felt a swell of gratitude for the moment, for her, and for the journey that had brought us here. That night, "Don't make me say it twice" became more than a phrase. It became a promise, a beginning, and a bold step into the warmth of something real. The world outside was soft with the glow of early evening, the sky painted in hues of lavender and gold as the sun dipped low behind the distant hills. We walked side by side down the quiet, tree-lined street, two silhouettes moving slowly, comfortably, like two halves of a whole finally finding their rhythm. Her hand found mine, fingers weaving together naturally, as if they had always belonged there. The touch was gentle, warm, a quiet reassurance that spoke of trust and promise without needing words. I felt the familiar steady beat of her pulse beneath my palm, grounding me in a way that nothing else could. There was no rush, no need to fill the spaces between us with forced conversation or declarations. Instead, we moved in sync with the soft rhythm of our shared steps, each moment stretching out like a quiet melody that neither of us wanted to end. The cool breeze brushed softly against our skin, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine from a nearby garden, wrapping us in a tender embrace. I glanced over at her. The way her hair caught the fading light, the gentle curve of her smile, the subtle sparkle in her eyes that held both strength and vulnerability. It struck me how beautifully she had embraced this moment, this new chapter, with a grace that made my heart swell. Our journey hadn't been easy. There had been hesitations, fears, and the quiet battles we fought within ourselves, the silent questions about whether we could truly belong to one another across the years and the worlds we came from. But standing here now, with her hand in mine and the promise of tomorrow lingering between us, those doubts seemed distant and small. We stopped beneath an ancient oak tree, its branches spreading wide like welcoming arms. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and I felt the softness of her breath against my skin, the subtle rise and fall of her chest syncing with mine. In that moment, everything felt right, as if the universe had conspired to bring us here, exactly where we were meant to be. Her fingers traced small, comforting circles on the back of my hand, a silent language of affection and belonging. I rested my cheek against her hair, inhaling the delicate scent that had become my anchor in this whirlwind of emotions, a blend of jasmine, cedarwood, and something uniquely hers. I spoke softly, barely more than a whisper. "I promise I won't need you to say it twice again." There was a quiet strength in my voice, a vow that carried the weight of all we had shared. She smiled, a tender curve that lit up her face, and replied, "Neither will I." Together, we turned back toward home, stepping into the evening with a quiet confidence. The world around us shimmered with possibility, each moment a gentle reminder that love, in its slow and steady way, had found its place between us. There was still much to explore, many chapters yet to be written. But for now, in the softness of this shared silence and the warmth of our joined hands, there was peace. Our story wasn't just about an age gap or forbidden attraction. It was about two souls discovering that connection, respect, and patience could bridge any distance, no matter the years between. And as we walked forward, side by side, I knew this was only the beginning of something beautiful.